What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, where if you've ever enjoyed an episode of Knight Rider, then this is definitely the video for you. Okay, so I get a ton of questions from first-time collectors. Do I go American made? Do I go Japanese made? So in today's video, we're going to be pitting my 1994 Chevrolet Corvette against the 1993 Nissan 300ZX. Both of these cars are automatics. Both of them are relatively the same type of base model, so it should be of comparison of what you got in the mid-90s when you were spending your cash on those sports cars. So I thought that today we'd talk about 3 key points when you first get into collecting cars. The first thing we'll talk about is reliability and maintenance. Then we'll talk about driving experience. And then we will finish it off with styling and which car gets the most looks. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to reliability and maintenance. We'll start over here with the 94 Chevrolet Corvette. This car has a small block 350 LT1 V8 in it. So you are getting 2 more cylinders than you are over in the 300ZX. But I think that's going to play more into the driving experience. As far as reliability on the Corvette, it's great. When it comes to reliability and maintenance, it is much easier to find a mechanic who's knowledgeable about the car. It's much easier to obtain certain parts for the Corvette than it is for the Nissan. So really, overall, I gotta give it to the Corvette as far as reliability and maintenance. If I had to show you how much I spent since owning the Corvette as opposed to since owning the Nissan, you would be shocked. It's cost me literally about 7 times as much money to keep the Nissan running as it is the Corvette. So for new collectors out there, especially on a budget, you may want to look at an American car first as far as reliability and maintenance costs. So moving over to the Nissan, we have the VG30 in this car. This is the naturally aspirated version of the 300ZX. It is not the twin turbo. And I've got to say, if you're looking for your first Japanese sports car to buy, do not buy a Z32. I know it's a good looking car. I know it gives you a giant car chub. I know you're up all night searching on Craigslist or wherever for cars. This is not really a good introductory Japanese sports car to collect, and let me kind of explain why. This platform is full of vacuum lines. It has more vacuum lines in it than a 1980s Hoover dealership. It is unbelievable all the different places that this car can suck air from and affect the idle and the way the car runs. Another issue with this platform is it's going to be far more difficult to find an experienced mechanic who is going to be able to work on the car and be knowledgeable about how to get it to where you want it. With the Corvette, there are far more mechanics who are even willing to work on the car. But with the 300ZX, most mechanics are going to make this face whenever you ask them to work on it. As far as reliability and maintenance, I do not recommend the Z32 as your first collector sports car. Remember, if you enjoy the content of this video, go ahead and smash that sub button and hit that notification bell so you can be alerted to the newest uploads to the channel. Now let's get back to the fun. So we'll kick off the driving experience with the Nissan 300ZX. For those of you who don't know, this is a 3-liter naturally aspirated 24-valve dual overhead cam V6. It's making about 225 horsepower, maybe a little more. The compression on this car is great, but the Corvette is making 300 horsepower. So you are dealing with quite a big gap as far as that goes. The driving experience of the 300ZX is awesome. It's much different than the Corvette. And as far as what do I mean by that is, you can see the road, the steering ratio is very, very quick, turn-ins to corners are great, but what you got to remember is you're not going to have that same torque that you're going to have when you're driving the Corvette. So if you're shopping for just a pure barn-burning monster of a car, the 300ZX naturally aspirated may not be the car for you. The torque is there, but really until you hit the higher power band in this car, are you going to be able to get the full experience of this motor. This car at lazy low RPMs kind of drives like a Honda Odyssey. It's not necessarily a 0 to 60 monster. As far as, I think we got a fan. As far as the overall driving experience, I do have to say the 300ZX is easier to drive at low speeds, but if you push the car to its limits, especially since it doesn't have any type of traction control, it can bite you in the ass. And unfortunately, this car is such a blast to drive, it instills confidence in the driver really, really quick. And just about the time you're pushing the car to its limits and having fun, the back end can snap out on you and you're going to be really, really sorry. So between the Corvette and the 300ZX, although I think the 300ZX is more fun to drive overall, the Corvette's much less switchy, it's way more predictable, and of course you do have some more of the modern day electric nannies to help you with all that torque. So what we're going to do now is hop in the Corvette and talk about that driving experience. All right, so let's talk about the handling of the Corvette compared to the Nissan 300ZX. With the Corvette, you have a really long hood, which I do have to say is going to impair your vision. You literally can't see the road whether you're coming into a corner or you're parking at the Piggly Wiggly. With the 300ZX, it is the opposite. Essentially, in the 300ZX, the hood disappears. Not so in the Corvette. With the Corvette, I'm constantly looking and seeing where I'm at. This car is much more of a boat than the Nissan 300ZX, which is going to make sense because of the longer wheelbase. Now let's talk about that longer wheelbase. Like I was saying earlier about the 300ZX and how it can be a little twitchy when pushed to its limits, the Corvette is at the opposite end of the spectrum. The car does have a primitive form of traction control called ASR, and I can let you know this car is very, very forgiving. I've been going into corners way too fast before, and it has bailed me out. So I've got to say, between the longer wheelbase, the V8, the more horsepower, and the torque, the Corvette is a blast to drive. But again, it's kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum of the Nissan 300ZX. So if you're a new collector, it kind of depends on what you're into. If you're going to be a horsepower junkie and going fast is the only thing that's important to you, you may want to lean more towards an American V8, whether that's a Corvette, a Trans Am, a Firebird. There's you can take your pick. There's plenty of American V8s that are affordable that you can get into collecting. But if you want to be a little bit more of the oddball and you love Japanese styling, you're a big Initial D fan and you absolutely have to have a Japanese car, then I can understand where the 300ZX would make more sense for you. As someone who's not a horsepower junkie, I've wound up saving a ton of money because I tend to keep my cars OEM, and because I'm not chasing a dyno or horsepower number, I tend to keep more money in my pocket for other things, whether that's cars or you name it. One thing about this car is you do get beautiful, proportionate styling. So the styling on the Nissan is definitely more reserved than the Corvette. There's no doubt about it. It's got a much shorter wheelbase. You can see the lines and the curves harken more to the Italian sort of European style design. The car is actually very beautiful, in my opinion, and anytime I'm out in it, I'm always getting looks. With the styling of the 300ZX, it is relatively understated compared to the C4 Corvette. Overall, I think it's a beautiful car, and in my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful cars to come out of the 1990s Japanese era. Okay, so moving over to the Corvette. The Corvette styling compared to the 300ZX is way over the top. You've got a giant hood. You've got big chrome wheels. You've got pop-up headlights. The car, no matter where I drive it, especially with the competition yellow color, is always going to get you looks. You can tell this car nearing the end of the C4 generation, with this being a 94, the last C4s being produced in 96, that GM had really stretched this platform out as far as many design cues as they could. It's a looker, there's no doubt about it. It's a beautiful Corvette. You definitely will stick out in traffic more with this car than you will with the 300ZX. All right, YouTube, we had a blast shooting this video today, comparing our Japanese platform to our American platform. Obviously, both are gonna have pros and cons, but if you follow your heart and buy the car you really want, it's not gonna be as big of a deal when it hits you in the pocketbook. I do wanna say that overall, the Nissan 300ZX has been way more of a pain in the ass since I've owned it as compared to the Corvette. You know, styling cues, that's gonna appeal to a certain buyer, so that's totally up to you. And as my hero Tom Petty once said, last dance with Mary Jane, one more time to kill the pain.